You've
Makes
got a black
sense.
shirt on, you're visible, you've got a yellow shirt on.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to get...
Sorry, yeah. Get started.
All right, guys, we're going to get started. Before we get started, Kev, one thing. I'm only seeing that I'm missing some of your face. Can you zoom the camera so that I can see more of you, number one? And number two, well, this is actually number one in terms of importance, is we're dedicating tonight's share to Gavin's late mom's yahrzeit. And Gavin, you got the floor.
Thanks.
This is your mom, obviously.
Yeah, so this is a picture. I don't actually have pictures of my late mom, unfortunately. So this is one of the few that we actually have, and it's from my brother's wedding, and so it was a lovely day for my mom. She was obviously over the moon because her son married obviously a Jewish girl, which was lovely, and kosher for a kohen and all of that. So I think my mom was very pleased. And this picture was actually taken at what's it called, at HOD Hall, in their garden there. So that's it, And just to tell you a little bit about my mom, she was an absolutely lovely lady, and I think my brother and I both got along very well with her, and obviously we miss her. We miss her tremendously. She definitely played a major role in getting my brother and I to where we are today, and yeah. That's it. I think she had very good midwives. I would say that would be like a major feature of her. All right, guys, we can continue. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. May the shiurim and the learning that you do and your constant improvement of midos and your acts of chesed be an aliyah for her neshama.
Amen.
Thank
Amen.
you. Thank you so much. Thanks.
Okay, I'm sure she's proud of you, mate. I am. All right.
Thank you.
Teach us, Kev.
Okay, just reading from the phone. I forgot to email it to myself, so it's on the. Okay, so we were talking about the crock pot yesterday, and yeah. Okay. Okay, here we go. We didn't cover. There we go. Yeah. Okay, sorry about this, guys. I forgot to. Okay, pouring hot water into a thermos. We did that. Sorry, the third one. Yeah. Okay, let's do. Okay, next thing they will do is placing a wrapped food into cholent. And the question is it permitted to put cooked kishka, kugel, rice wrapped in plastic bags or aluminium foil into the cholent before Shabbos? So some poskim hold that it is prohibited because it violates the rabbinic injunction of hatmana. Hatmana means to insulate a pot of food in order to retain or intensify its heat. In the opinion of the Taz, quoted by the Mishnah Brura, to submerge a vessel containing food into a vessel containing hot water is also a form of hatmana. Thus, a plastic bag containing kishko or foil-wrapped kugel, which is submerged in a large pot of cholent, may be considered a violation of this. Other poskim, however, do not consider this a form of hatmana. They maintain that we do not view this as one food. We do not view this as one food. Insulating another, the kugel, but as two foods, cholent and kugel, being warmed simultaneously on a fire. Still, other poskim suggest that a foil or plastic wrapping is not considered a vessel normally used for insulation. But all poskim permit placing wrapped kishka or kugel in a cholent before Shabbos if one of the following conditions is met. A, if the kishka or kugel is not entirely submerged in the cholent. B, if the item placed inside the cholent is the type that would always be cooked in this way, inside a bag or plastic wrapping, as with kishka. If the bag or foil is left partially open, or if it is permanent, this way is permanent. I think it's worse. It's permanent. Permitted to, if it's permitted to submerge the big bag into the cholent, because it is obviously meant to be about the taste of the cholent, thus rendering it all one big dish, one insulating another. Okay. Some people who cook cholent in a crock pot, place for the cholent ingredients in a bag and then put the bag into the pot. This is not considered hatmana according to all views. Some of the purpose is not to insulate food, but to keep the pot as clean as possible. I don't know, whatever that means. Okay. But anyway, so I know some people, you like put it in it, and then the bag eventually disintegrates, and the spices get distributed amongst the cholent. Anyway.
Okay. So thank you, Kevin, for teaching us. And let's get started with the Gemara share. We're obviously going to do a bit of revision for yesterday because everybody was exhausted, load shedding, relate share. You get the reward for persevering. So let's get started. So we're on the 71st daf, as you know. And the Gemara cited the clause of the Mishnah that read, if one stole an ox or sheep and then slaughtered it on Yom Kippur, he pays the fourfold and fivefold. And what we discussed yesterday, that was not only a shock to me, but to you guys, because we thought that if you slaughter an animal on Yom Kippur, it's certainly that person is liable for the death penalty. But in fact, it's not the case. So the Gemara asks, so therefore, you pay the 4 or 5-fold penalty, obviously. So the Gemara asks a simple question. They say, look, why is one who slaughters a stolen animal on Yom Kippur liable to the 4-fold or 5-fold payment? Because granted, there's no court-imposed death penalty for desecrating Yom Kippur. But there is, guys, at any rate, a malchut penalty, which is lashes. And it's accepted by us that one does not receive malchus, lashes, and pay money for the same crime. So what we're saying here is one who performs a forbidden labor on Yom Kippur has violated the prohibition in Vayikra in Leviticus chapter 23, verse 28, which says, and you shall not do any work on this very day, and thus liable to malchus, lashes. It's clear. And it's also found in the Gemara Machos on the 13th daf. But it explains the penalty very clearly. So the Gemara expands it in Ketubot and in Makot, derives this rule also from the verse in Deuteronomy. And what rule is that? Is that specifically we learned with regards to Kimlei B'di Rabba Minei, and what is Kimlei B'di Rabba Minei? Kevin asked an excellent question yesterday. He said, bottom line, what does it mean? And it means that he stands liable to the penalty greater than it, meaning that at the end of the day, if there are two penalties, say, for example, 2 death penalties, the guy's done major problems, we give him the more stringent penalty because we can only kill the guy once, and then the more stringent penalty covers the lesser death penalty. That he gets a kapara providing he's genuinely sorry, in addition to the death penalty, but he manages to make use of that opportunity. There are also cases where there is financial liability mixed with a death penalty. So, for example, we said if one sets alight a building and kills somebody, when he's got intent to kill a person, not accidental, and he causes property damage because that house or building bursts down and the person dies, according to one doesn't describe his fire as his property, but merely his arrow as an extension of him. In that particular case, we don't hold him financially liable because he's getting the death penalty. Okay? Let's take another case. We just learned in the previous, basically in the same Mishnah, this one, but in the previous stuff, which is carrying on with the same Mishnah, that if somebody breaks Shabbos and then at the same time they sell an animal that they stole, and they broke Shabbos at the same time through the transaction. We weigh. Well, let's just take a case of. In that particular case, we waiver the financial 4 or 5-fold penalty because we give him the death penalty for breaking the Shabbos. We explained about taking from the public to the private domain in the last stuff, or from basically harvesting figs in lieu of the animal that he stole. Bearing in mind one other principle is that Kimle B'di Rabba Minay. Kevin asked a good question last week. He was really on top form, more than me. And he said, well, how do you know that the circumstance is really going to be like that? He's right. I mean, if somebody is about to do an illicit transaction by buying stolen goods, the buyer is certainly not going to have witnesses around or anything like that. Nobody wants to do time for the crime. So what happens is he might not have 2 witnesses there that have a noise. So the thief then, for breaking Shabbos, is not really liable for the death penalty, only for the financial penalty. And what we said, though, is that there's a mechanism of Kimle B'di Rabba Minay, which means if that person could, under the right circumstances, be given the death penalty for that crime, even though in this case maybe there's no witnesses or 1 witness, or there was no hazroah, there was no warning, because that crime in its ideal conviction would get the death penalty, the laws of Kimle B'di Rabba Minay still apply. What proof can I give you for that? We learned in Sanhedrin, if a thief breaks into a house, his life is in jeopardy because the owner could kill him. Because the owner could figure, well, the thief could kill me. And therefore, because his life is in jeopardy by his own doing, which is why I don't understand why Kimle B'di Rabba Minay works in that case. But then you could say Kimle B'di Rabba Minay works of his own doing because he committed murder, which was also of his own doing. Bottom line here is the thief could get killed and accosted by the homeowner. And because that happens, if he's in mortal danger, even if he doesn't get killed, the item that he breaks in the homeowner's home while his life is in danger, he doesn't have to pay for that. So that's a proof of could, but never happened. So that makes sense. So what we learn is that there's also Kimle B'di Rabba Minay, not only for death and financial penalties, but also like a malchut, a lash penalty, and financial. So you can say maybe financial penalty is worse. I definitely don't think so. If anybody landed up in a Turkish prison, and the jail wardens would beat the person within an inch of their life, or a person could pay money to get off that, even if he'd bond his house not to get beaten half to death. Believe me. So then what's worse? Obviously lashes is worse. So if lashes is the worst penalty, then if simultaneously a financial penalty is incurred within the same act, then obviously there would be no 4 or 5-fold penalty. You might come to say, well, how do we know Kimle B'di Rabba Minay applies to malchus? Maybe it's just to the death penalty. So we know that specifically from the pasuk that we're dealing with. Why? What's my proof? It states in Kesubot 32b, 37a, and Makot 4b that it brings in Deuteronomy, Devarim chapter 25, verse 2, and it says, and the judge shall cast him down and lash him in accordance with his wickedness. Now the word wickedness, which is in the singular form in the Hebrew, indicates that you may punish him for one wickedness, or one act of wickedness, but you may not punish him for 2 wickednesses. In other words, who's you? The court. The court cannot impose 2 kinds of penalties for the same act. And the exact source of that is Ketubot 31b. So he should be liable to malchut and exempt from the monetary penalty that might have occurred at the same time. So we see that Kimle B'di Rabba Minay applies to malchus too. So we apply that and not the financial penalty. So what's the question? The question is, since we know that breaking Yom Kippur results in malchus, why is the thief subject to pay the 4 or 5-fold penalty, since we would waiver the 4 or 5-fold penalty? Kev, you're looking at your hands. I don't know if you're concentrating on the shear at the moment.
Sorry, it's a bit sore. Sorry, yeah.
Oh, shame, the stitch.
I'm listening, sorry.
It's pulling.
Yeah, no, not sore. It's just very a bit irritating. I'm just rubbing it. Okay, carry on.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is as follows. Is the question the Gemara is asking is, listen, why is there a 4 or 5-fold penalty? Because if a person's desecrating Yom Kippur by slaughtering an animal, he has to do malchus. If he's done malchus, we learn that he wouldn't have to pay the 4 or 5-fold penalty if he's transgressing another act, because we only give him the greater penalty. So why is he eligible to the 4 or 5-fold penalty? That's the question of the Gemara. That's the second step. Right.
So we malchut, like it says, malchut and 4 to 5-fold penalty.
Yes, and the question is why.
Okay.
Well, the question is in this case, firstly, why would he have both? I'm saying let's take Kimle B'di Rabba Minay out of the picture for a second. In other words, take out of the picture that he stands liable to the penalty greater than it. So that just say that.
Bless you.
Bless you.
Say, I mean, say that law of Kim later okay, say Kim B'di Rabba Minay didn't apply here. Why is he paying both malchus and a 4 or 5-fold penalty? Why would it be both?
Maybe.
It doesn't make sense. Right?
Could it be that it's Yom Kippur and Shabbos on the same day?
No. You want to take?
Could it be there's two events? It's either Yom Kippur and something else on the same day. Maybe.
No, not on the same day. Not on the same day. But you're onto something about two things. Yeah.
It must be two separate incidences then.
Well, it's no. That's the wrong wording. It's two separate crimes within the same incident. Actually, it's two separate crimes within the same incident because at the point where he stole an animal and slaughtered it, the minute you steal an animal or slaughter it and sell it, either one, that's when you're eligible to the 4 or 5-fold payment. Gav, you're eligible to a 2-fold payment if you just steal the animal, not you, a thief. He's eligible to a 2-fold payment. He pays double. But if he steals the animal and slaughters or sells it, he's then eligible to a 4 or 5-fold, depending if he pays 4-fold if it's a sheep or 5-fold if it's an ox. Okay? If he slaughters or sells the animal. So that is one crime. A second crime is that he slaughtered an animal on Yom Kippur. That's the second crime. So therefore, it's two transgressions that occurred simultaneously with the same act. That's what you've got to bear in mind. And that's the exact point at saying, well, then why is there a 4 or 5-fold penalty? Because if there's Kim B'di Rabba Minay, he'd get the malchus lashes, which is the greater of the penalty, but not the 4 or 5-fold payment created at the same act. Why? Because it's the same act occurring at the same time. That's the whole point of Kim B'di Rabba Minay. Same timing, same act. Just has two different rules of two different transgressions that are broken. So the Gemara turns around and says very straightforwardly, who is the author of this Mishnah? Okay, it must be authored by Rabbi Meir, who says that one can receive malchus and pay money for the same crime. In other words, the Mishnah in Makot 4a discusses the case of witnesses. Well, before we get there, Rabbi Meir doesn't apparently hold by Kimle B'di Rabba Minay. Otherwise, if we hold this Mishnah according to the rabbis, there would only be the malchus and not the 4 or 5-fold payment. So the Gemara is saying the only suggestion is this Mishnah is authored by Rabbi Meir, who holds that you can get malchus and pay the 4 or 5-fold payment. There's no Kimle B'di Rabba Minay in this case. How do we know? In Makos 4a, it discusses the case of witnesses who testify that a person owes his fellow 200 zuz, and they are then found to be Eidim Zomimim, conspiring witnesses. And how do we find out about conspiring witnesses? So there's two witnesses that come against a person and say that this is what this person did wrong. And then a second group of witnesses come and say the first group of witnesses couldn't have viewed this particular event in Johannesburg because they were with us in holiday in Cape Town. So then what we learned with Eidim Zomimim, exactly as Kevin said last night, is what they intend to do to the victim is done to them, providing the trial hasn't gone to the point of being applied. Then obviously the reciprocal penalty obviously is not imposed. And where do we get this reciprocal penalty from? Devarim, Deuteronomy chapter 19, verse 19, which it says, and you shall do to him as he conspired to do to his brother. So in other words, these Zomimim should be liable to Malchus for violating that prohibition in Shmot, in Exodus chapter 20, verse 13, which says what? You shall not bear false witness. Are you with me? So based on that and the verse in Deuteronomy, the sages in the Mishnah rule that they pay and do not receive Malchus. Why? Because one does not receive Malchus and pay money for the same crime. Okay? So we're talking about that particular case in Malchus. That obviously, so Rabbi Meir doesn't rule like that. He rules that they receive Malchus and pay the intended victim what they sought to take away from them. Because what did the Eidim Zomimim intend to do to his fellow is cost him 200 zuz. Okay? Now, for being Eidim Zomimim, they should have obviously also gotten Malchus for certain reasons. But what happens is that Rabbi Meir says that they receive Malchus, I think for corrupting the court system, and pay the intended victim what they sought to take away from him for the reciprocal penalty of 200 zuz. For the scriptural verse that makes them liable for lashes is not the same one that makes them liable for payment. Okay? So in other words, the two penalties stem from two different pesukim. Okay? So Rabbi Meir would hold that the thief who slaughters the stolen animal in Yom Kippur receives lashes for desecrating Yom Kippur, and he pays a 4- or 5-fold payment for slaughtering the stolen animal, since the two different penalties stem from two different verses in the Chumash. Does that make sense, guys? It's very straightforward. Okay, so the Gemara counters, and it says, if our Mishnah is indeed the opinion of Rabbi Meir, then even if the thief slaughtered the stolen animal on Shabbat, he should also pay the 4- or 5-fold penalty. In other words, although he's liable to the death penalty for performing a forbidden labor on Shabbat, because if you slaughter an animal on Shabbat as opposed to Yom Kippur, it's not Malchus, it's a death penalty. You should nevertheless pay the 4- or 5-fold payment for slaughtering a stolen animal, according to Rabbi Meir. So, in other words, it's saying Rabbi Meir apparently does not exempt a sinner from monetary payment by virtue of having simultaneously incurred a greater penalty, even if that greater penalty is a court-imposed death penalty. That's what it's saying here. That's what it's suggesting. So it says, so let's say that's the case, because there is in our Mishnah mentions about an animal being slaughtered on Shabbat. So then why does our Mishnah rule below that the thief who slaughters the stolen animal on Shabbat is exempt? In other words, it's saying if this is the same Mishnah that's authored by Rabbi Meir, who holds that there's no, the Kimlei B'di Rabbi Minay doesn't apply. He says that there's no 4- or 5-fold payment for killing an animal on Shabbat. Then we can only assume there's a problem. Because, if he applied Kimle B'di Rabbi Minei, then there wouldn't be a 4 or 5-fold payment. Does that make sense? And the truth of it is that that he is exempt from that payment. So that's the question. In other words, if Rabbi Meir wrote this particular Mishnah, we understand why he says there's a 4 or 5-fold payment and malchus for desecrating Yom Kippur by slaughtering the animal. But we don't understand why he exempts the payment of the 4 or 5-fold and when a person slaughters the animal on Shabbat. Why? Well, very, very simple. Because if it's authored by Rabbi Meir, why would he let the person off the hook on Kimle B'di Rabbi Minei when it's, again, a case of a greater penalty and a lower penalty? Either the Mishnah is authored by Rabbi Meir or not. It seems inconsistent that in one case he holds by Kimle B'di Rabbi Minei with regards to malchut and the financial payment, lashes and the financial payment. It says you have to pay both. And in this case of breaking Shabbos, which is a death penalty offense, and slaughtering a stolen animal, there's not a 4 or 5-fold payment. So either this Mishnah is not authored by Rabbi Meir, or he holds a difference between breaking Shabbos, getting the death penalty, and paying a financial penalty compared to getting lashes and paying a financial penalty. Because we know in getting lashes and a financial penalty, there's no Kimle B'di Rabbi Minei according to Rabbi Meir. Yes, according to the sages it is. So the Gemara anticipates a possible answer. And it says, and perhaps you will say in reply to this question that Rabbi Meir holds only that one can receive malchus and pay for the same crime, but he does not hold that one can be put to death and pay for the same crime. In other words, in a case of both execution and monetary payment, Rabbi Meir does apply the principle of he stands to the penalty greater than it. Okay? But then you've got a problem. Because the next part of the Gemara says, but does Rabbi Meir not hold that one can be executed and assessed monetary liability for the same crime? Why? It was taught in the Braisa. If one stole an ox or sheep and slaughtered it on Shabbat, or if one stole an ox or sheep and slaughtered it for idol worship, or one stole an ox condemned to be stoned and slaughtered it, or in all these cases he pays the 4 or 5-fold payment. These are the words of Rabbi Meir. So evidently, what that means is that Rabbi Meir rules that he pays this 4 or 5-fold penalty even when he slaughters the animal on Shabbat or for idol worship, in which he can simultaneously be liable for the death penalty as well. So we found a Braisa that seems to contradict the opinion on the Mishnah. Okay? But the sages exempt him. So the sages hold opposite to Rabbi Meir. So evidently Rabbi Meir holds that one simultaneously incurs liability to the death penalty and payment is subject to both penalties. Okay, so the Gemara answers, they said, leave that Braisa out of the discussion, meaning no proof can be brought from the Braisa with respect to whether Rabbi Meir holds the liability to capital punishment and exempts one from simultaneously incurring a monetary liability. They're saying, leave this Braisa out. Let's just concentrate on our Mishnah. For it was stated regarding that Braisa, Rav Yaakov said in the name of Rav Yochanan, or as others reported, Rav Yirmiyah said in the name of Rav Shimon ben Lakish, that Rav Avin and Rav Illa and the entire group say in the name of Rav Yochanan, the Braisa is dealing with where he slaughtered it through the agency of another person. Okay, so what we're going to do is next time is see that it's not that Rabbi Meir is holding differently in the Braisa. We're saying when there's another party involved, it changes things, because when you have an agent, it's difficult to incur a death penalty when somebody else does a hitman contract on your behalf. Because remember, there can be no agency through transgression. The hitman decided, Kevin, to be a hitman. He knows Hashem said it's wrong. So therefore, he gets a death penalty, not the mafia boss that ordered it. And Shemaim is responsible, but it's grama, indirect. So we're saying that in that case, obviously there's an act capable of getting a death penalty because you used an agent to desecrate Shabbos or idol worship. So, but that person didn't do it themselves, so they're not eligible for the death penalty, but they're eligible for the 4 or 5-fold payment that their agent caused. But then that law of the agent is responsible for his own transgression. Why would there be liability for a 4 or 5-fold payment? And the answer goes, and we're going to discuss it tomorrow, is there's certain things in the Pasuk that compare, just like if you steal an animal and sell it, they're eligible to a 4 or 5-fold payment. You need a buyer. So there has to be a third party involved. There's a comparison made that if you have an agent that helps you with the slaughter, just like a seller needs a buyer, because a person can't do their own shechita. Most people don't know how. So they obviously employ a shochet to do it. The shochet doesn't know it's stolen, and therefore they're still eligible for a 4 or 5-fold payment, even though there's an agent. But the shochet that does it on Shabbos is liable to the death penalty, but not the person ordering it, but he's liable to the financial penalty. We're going to go through it more tomorrow, another time. Saturday night, what time is the shiur?